best person to do this talk should have been someone who has the experience of not father or a grandparent, but someone who is living the grandparents' strength, or getting the strength from these grandparents and feeling the hope that being with grandparents will have on their growth development. However, when the time comes, we simply have to accept and try to do the best that there is that we can do. So I ask the question to especially our younger people: where are your grandparents?
My grandfather is at home. My grandmother is in the United States.
My grandfather is at home. My grandmother is in the United States. Truthfully, I didn't expect an answer, but that's okay. Yes. And somebody might say, well, okay, why you ask that? Because you see, today that question seems to be a normal question in our people, young people's growing up. We might be told, well, my grandmother living in the country in America, or I don't know, or she in a home, he in a home someplace, if they ain't dead. Yeah? And why am I saying that? If I get those answers, I wouldn't be surprised. But do these people have a role in our lives today? You know, and you might say, yes, they do. But there are many families where the children do not even know their grandparents today. There are many families where the children do not know their grandparents. And these are not necessarily dead. They're living someplace, maybe in a home, maybe in the country, maybe they're gone away. But the children today sometimes are not aware of who their grandparents are. Now, when I grew up in the 50s to the 70s, it was normal to have family living in the same community, in the same compound, and even sometimes in the same house. You have what we may call nowadays the extended family, where you have parents, mother, father, where you have children, where you have grandparents, uncles and aunts, nephews and nieces, and other relatives living in close community. And everybody seemed to know one another. That was, from my lifetime, in the 50s and the 60s, and perhaps even the 70s to some extent, yes. By the time my children started arriving, we had the extended family as we knew it then. They had started to disintegrate. So now we more focused on mommy and daddy and them children. And grandmother and grandfather might be somewhere out in the country or in another place. However, even then, my children, and perhaps the most senior people's children here, during holiday times, during holiday times, they would get an opportunity to perhaps go and visit their grandparents or their aunties and their uncles who live in some other place. So they still had that kind of connectivity with the ancestors, if I might call them that. Nowadays, you find a situation where children are growing up, even if what you call nuclear family today is not necessarily nuclear, because you might have had mommy and some children, or in some rare case, daddy and some children. That's what we focus on. That's what we focus in. And of course, we know that parents are basically the first persons to impact on their children, mother and father. So we see that the parents are generally their first teachers. We find families where grandparents did not have any role. And I think that that is what we're trying to see if we can correct. Because you see, grandparents have a very special function to play in the life of their children. Grandparents have a very special function to play in the life of their children. And where you have grandparents involved in the family, you find children, we'll call them grandchildren, are generally happier, they're generally more focused, they're generally more grounded, because grandparents are involved. Why is that so? Why is that so? A healthy connection between the grandchildren and their grandparents benefits not only the children, not only their parents, but even the grandparents themselves. That relationship between parents, grandparents, and their children possibly is second only to the relationship between parents themselves. And in some cases, the grandparents' relationship is even more focused, more committed than sometimes the parents. Because in a few cases, you have children growing up with only their grandparents. You meet them? Children growing up only with their grandparents. Mommy left the children and had to travel to Canada or the United States or Trinidad, or they're working full-time someplace in one of the hotels, and they hardly get any time to come home to look after the children. So the grandparents are the ones who actually are bringing up the children. That could be good, and it could be not so good. That could be good, and it could be not so good. Grandparents have great impact on the lives of the grandchildren. Children's idea of what a normal, healthy relationship is often shaped by the relationship they have with their grandparents. Grandparents are able to teach them something about their ancestral values. Grandparents are able to point them in that space where they can better understand their culture, their own grounding, their own life relationships. Where the grandparents exist in the family, there seem to be more emotional stability. You find that the children growing up in these communities where the grandparents are involved, they have what we might call another layer to bounce their issues off. So when parents are busy doing their thing, the grandparents might be able to assist in some other area, like listening to their concerns. Yeah, a child would say, Grandma, Mommy don't understand. Mommy don't understand because I'm trying to tell her what is my problem and she ain't taking me on. But Grandma, who seem to have a little more time, can sit down and hear the child and possibly give some kind of a considered solution to whatever the issue might be. That helps to reduce some of the stresses and the depressions that these children may have. For children, having grandparents around could mean having another companion whom they can play with. And you might say, well, play with them. Yes, play with them. I remember not too long ago, my mother-in-law, who passed not more than 2 months ago, my children, who were her grandchildren, and the other sons and daughters' children, they would visit from time to time, and they are happy to be able to play a game of cards with Grandma. And she liked to play cards with them. They loved to play cards with her. Even if she would cheat from time to time, they still feel good that she is there to play cards with them. So they would come. They're not all living there, but they will come from time to time. And she is happy to play a game of cards with them and to help them over certain issues that they're having. It also provides them with another pair of shoulders that they could lean on when they're having difficulties. Yes. Mommy ain't listening. Mommy ain't understanding. Daddy always busy. It's either he on the newspaper, he on the television, he gone to work, he gone and down the road by with the boys, and he ain't listening. So we want somebody, and as such, the grandmother or grandfather, more likely the grandmother, but the grandfather too, would be able to bear the children's burdens that they have. And children feel good knowing that at least their grandparents can hear their concerns and they can cry on the grandma's shoulder, they can cry on granddad's shoulder, and something can work out. It gives them somebody who can share their concerns which they are not yet ready to share with their parents. And you know, especially our teenagers, they have issues, and they don't want yet to share it with mommy and daddy. Because you remember, daddy and mommy don't understand everything, eh? So they go by grandma, and they tell grandma their little problems. They call granddad, and they say, Granddad, look at what is happening. And grandma or granddad would give them some consolation. Maybe advise them, yes, to discuss it with mommy and daddy, but at the same time, they were feeling more comfortable being able to share with grandma, grandpa, before they thought of going to grandmom. When it comes to creativity and imaginations, grandmom, grandparents are some of the best partners. They have a history of long ago, and they are able to share that history with their young children. Many grandparents will tell you that their roles of being grandparents is the single most important and satisfying thing in their lives. Being grandma and being grandpa is the single most important thing for them at this time. They dote over their children, even to the extent of spoiling them sometimes, especially the little ones. And you know, some parents, mommy and daddy, they become jealous of the way grandma take care of these children. They look at their lives before, how grandma and grandpa used to deal with them, and they feel they didn't used to treat us so. How come? They get jealous. But we could say that the grandparents now, having had the experience of their own children and having had time to learn and to perfect their skills, are able today to better they're able to perfect their skills. They are now able better to give their grandchildren a refined version of their care. They learn, and because they learn, they are now able to do a better job. So parents sometimes get vexed or get jealous because they're spending a lot of time which they did not give to us. They're looking in their purse and they're finding the 2 pence halfpenny to give the child when we ask them for, they never had enough to give us. They go in their little box, and a grandma, especially grandma, always has a little box somewhere with something in it for when them grandchildren come. And mommy ain't feeling happy about that. Daddy ain't feeling happy about that because they didn't used to do that for us. They didn't used to do that for us. Some of us sitting here would remember them kind of times. How parents, you were jealous of your children. Imagine you being jealous of your children. Yeah? Many grandparents would acknowledge that they do a better job today for their grandchildren than they were able to do with their own children. Many grandparents will tell you, I'm doing a better job now than I did when I had my children. And the children experience a different, better kind of way. And that makes the parents sort of feel bad too, eh? When grandparents are involved, it makes a big difference in their children's life. Where they do not live together, and sometimes they do not live together, grandparents may be able to see their children on a very regular basis, sometimes as often as once a week, because they're not living far. The children can come and spend the weekend. And parents are happy when they are able to say, go by all your grandmother, go by all your grandfather, because my work will take me over the weekend. I have so much to do, so grandma will take care of all you. So grandparents are able to see their children as often sometimes as once a week, maybe once a month, but at least during the holiday time. And they report that having changed the children's diaper, well, since the child born, I've been working with them and helping them. Such times can manifest itself in a healthier, happier grandchildren. We believe that grandparents are valuable resources because they have so many stories that they can tell, so many experiences that they can relate. And if our children are willing to learn, they are able to gain some of these experiences from their grandparents. Oftentimes, children will listen to their grandparents even when they are not ready to listen to their parents or to other adults. Mommy says, these children are so troublesome, they're so disobliging, they're so disordered. And when grandma's talking to them, it's like it's a new kind of child you're dealing with, because the children have that kind of a regard, deeper regard for grandma, grandpa, than they have even sometimes for their own parents. Grandparents are also a link, and they have a special role in teaching the children about their culture. Who best to be able to teach the child about the days when they used to have to walk with Masanto, go up in the estate and bring down the basket of cocoa and the bag of the bunch of banana and things like that. So the children get an idea as to what used to happen in those times. In those times. They have a lot of family history that they can share. They share their family history. So they're telling about the things that happened when they were little girls and little boys. They're telling about the things that they experienced in those early times. And children understand more of who they really are, their children are, and where they came from because of the connection that they have with their grandparents. And they come to be better rounded and better grounded in culture, in history, understanding, knowledge, wisdom. Young adults as grandchildren will tell you that the influence that their grandparents had on their values, because grandparents teach values, on their attitudes, on their behavior, cannot be measured. Grandparents transmit to their children much of the social norms and the values. How things must be, how things used to be, and how you should behave now that you are growing up. My grandmother used to tell my sisters when they were growing up, you're becoming a young lady now. You know the age for that, eh? You're becoming a young lady now. So you have to stop playing with boys. Anybody know that? You have to stop playing with boys. And it did not just mean, friends, it did not just mean that you can't play the rounders with them again. It did not mean that you cannot play marbles or stone, pick stone with them again. It had a deeper and more profound meaning that you're becoming a young lady now, so you have to stop playing with boys. In a way, they were transmitting the culture, they were transmitting the value to their children without telling them exactly where they were heading. But it seems to me that the children understood. It seems to me that the children understood. Grandparents are quite comfortable to give advice and to discuss these values with their grandchildren. Especially during tough times, having an extra layer of support can make a big difference in a child's life. When they fall out with mommy and daddy, where they running? Grandma day. And it seems like grandma had a special way of solving these little issues, even if they send them back to mommy and daddy to be dealt with. But they have a better feeling when grandma say, okay, this is how it must be. Now go and tell mommy you're sorry. Simple. Go and tell mommy you're sorry. So when things are difficult, that extra layer of support that they think they have, and they do have, make a big difference in our children's lives. Where grandparents have that close relationship with their grandchildren, especially during their teenage years, you find that the teenagers have less behavioral and emotional problems, and they have fewer social difficulties with peers, with friends, because they have somebody that they can bounce it off on. Grandparents can offer an extra set of ears when children need someone to talk to, because the children just find it easier to open up to their grandparents, to share their difficulties, to share their problems. And their grandparents seem always to be there to listen and to give some kind of advice and encouragement. In today's day, a lot of our grandparents are tucked away someplace, while the parents try to take care of their children alone. But as we said, where the grandparents are involved, both the parents and the children and even the grandparents feel a sense of accomplishment, achievement, and are much happier. Grandparents are able to better transmit the faith to those children. You remember in our growing up days, it was the grandmother who would take the children to church. Would call the entire family together to kneel before the bed and to pray at night, to be able to recite the rosary, to be able to listen to the stories from the Bible, to be able to hear what the church teaches and believes in. It was the grandparents more than anything that took that responsibility on. I think it could be the same thing even today. However, because grandparents are sometimes a little off, you find a situation where children are not as connected to their faith as in the past. However, we hope and we pray that even now, we can get back to that stage where the family is together. Children, parents, grandparents. And so the grandparents are better able to help their children to know their faith, to practice their faith, and to grow to be healthy and strong people in faith and in life. Grandparents, Pope Francis says, grandparents are the wisdom, or the church's wisdom. And he was thinking of his own role, his own grandmother's role in his development, especially in him becoming a priest. In other words, a choice of vocations and reaching where he is today. And so he calls on all our young people. He calls on all our young people to make or to listen to their grandparents, listen to the elderly, because they are the wisdom. They have been given the gift by the Holy Spirit. They are the church's wisdom. We pray that our young people, even today, can rediscover the values of their grandparents and can live and grow so that they too would, when they become grandparents, parents and grandparents, they would have something that they can transmit to their own children. Thank you, Almighty.